Hey, it's Sonia, and welcome to the SMARTA Podcast.
Today's guest is John R. Miles. He's a former Navy officer, Fortune 50 executive, and CEO turned global thought leader. He's the host of the Passion-Struck Podcast, best-selling author, and the visionary behind the Mattering Movement, a mission to help 10 million people rediscover their worth and live lives of deep purpose and connection. John's powerful journey from quiet desperation to purposeful living began after a life-altering trauma in 2017. Today, he draws from that experience to teach others how to reclaim their significance, reconnect to what matters, and create lasting impact in their lives and communities. All right, I'm so excited to dive into today's conversation, into your journey, your insights on personal and professional growth, and the impact you're making around the world. John R. Miles, welcome on the SMARTA Podcast.
Sonia, it is such an honor to be here. Thank you for bringing me on.
This episode is brought to you by SMARTA, an executive search and talent advisory firm that knows people are the true engine of any organization. SMARTA doesn't just fill roles, they find the right match, aligning talent with culture to unlock real potential. Because sometimes what makes someone extraordinary isn't on the resume. It's what's waiting to be discovered. Learn more at www.samare.com. Where I want to take you first is you speaking directly with the listener. From all your experience from a decorated Navy officer to then moving on to leading Fortune 500 C-suite with your Passion-Struck podcast that has over 50 million downloads. Big congratulations to you there for that one.
Thank you.
Also being a best-selling author, to the book behind, if you're watching this, right there next to you. From all of the experience that you've had, could you go ahead and give them 3 most important takeaways you've learned over the course of your journey?
So the first and probably the most important is there's this theory called self-discrepancy theory, and it has 3 aspects of it. If you want to think of a triangle, there's your actual self, there's the self you think you should be, and there's the self that you could be. So many of us wind up chasing who we think we should be instead of who we could be. And there's so much research that shows what happens when we do that. There's this psychologist out of Cornell University named Tom Gilovich who has studied thousands of people who are in the 3rd trimester of their life. And when he asked all of them what their biggest regret in life was, it's 76% of them came back with the same thing. It's not pursuing becoming their ideal self, which is who you could be. So my advice to listeners is don't listen to what the influencers are telling you. Don't listen to many times your relatives, etc. You need to go after the life that you want to live, that you could live if you put your heart and soul behind it. So that would be one. Another one would be to think about your future self and to really plan out your life from the basis not of your bucket list, but from your reverse bucket list. Because what I mean by this is when we put a bucket list out there, so many of these things we want to achieve seem to be so far-fetched that people don't take action on them. But the way to start taking action is to build confidence. And the way you build confidence is start to think about the things you've already accomplished in life, no matter how old you are. And that's where your reverse bucket list comes into play. Thinking about all the things that you've already achieved in your life, maybe that you never thought were going to be possible, and the hurdles that you've had to overcome. And so that's why the reverse bucket list is so important, because it helps boost that confidence that will take you forward. And then the last thing I would say is I recently did a solo episode on mental health awareness, but I really focused on the system behind our mental health, which really gets into the ecosystem of who we surround ourselves with. And so a concept that I talk about in Passion-Struck the book is the mosquito auditor. And what this really comes down to is you need to look for those mosquitoes in your life. And as you're trying to reinvent who you are or take your life to the next level, you need people who are on the bus surrounding you, who are supporting you, not who are deterring you from taking the steps that will lead you to where you want to go.
Absolutely. And can I just say, I really love the way you started out with that triangle, because I think a lot of people found themselves to that triangle where we should be, where we think we could be, and then your actual present self. And it happens to me as well when I find myself just reminiscing on what I could be and thinking in the same way you said about your bucket list, what I want to do is so far away or looks like miles ahead. Where I want to shift you on towards now is your book, Passion Struck. Some praise that Seth Godin says about it is, it's easier than ever to become complacent or stuck, but John Miles reminds us that we can lead and contribute with intention if we choose. I think it's so witty the way you start the story with, are you living like you matter? This one sole powerful question that instantly makes you pause and think, is my life, is my current life the one I've been dreaming as when I was small? Or what was your mission that you wanted to lean in towards by writing this book? And why do you think this powerful question is most important now than ever?
So Sonia, about 15 years ago, I was given this mission from God. And at the time, the words that were being given to me is I was supposed to help the lonely, the hopeless, the helpless, the broken, the battered, the bored. Everything you want for a marketing campaign, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I took a step back, and as I saw those different names, I had no idea who those people were. At the time, I was a CIO at Dell Computers, and I was living the life of, C-level in a Fortune 50 company. And the furthest thing in my mind was serving those people. But as I have started to really explore this, and I've looked at the epidemics that we have today of loneliness, of hopelessness, I see those all as symptoms of something far greater. And that is, so many people today feel like they don't matter in their own life. Gordon Flett, who's a psychologist from Canada, refers to this as anti-mattering. I kind of call it unmattering. But I think this is the root behind all the symptoms that I was given. And when I look back upon my own life, I think we are best positioned to serve the person we once were. And I think it's easy to think, here's a person who was a C-level executive, had this great resume, but there was a point where I started to feel invisible in my own life. And I think so many people today have that same feeling. So that is why, my mission has become to help people realize that they matter and to live their life like it matters. Just like the shirt I'm wearing, choose to matter.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's a choice. And that's something I talk about throughout the whole book, is our whole life is determined by the micro choices that we make. We make 60,000 plus decisions per day. Yeah. And when you start making choices that are taking you towards where you want to go in life, you start heading towards that path. But if you keep making choices that keep you stuck where you're at, that's exactly where you're going to stay. So you need to choose to matter, and you need to start making choices that are taking you down that intentional path.
This brings me back to, that every single person's voice matters, and every single person, I believe, truly has the potential to accomplish their dreams, to become their best version of themselves. And I just want to talk to you a little more about intentionality right now, especially about escaping the pinball life, which is the feeling of bouncing from one thing to the next without having that clear sense of direction where you're going. And then you say also in your book that being apathetic is a choice and being intentional is also a choice. Now, many young professionals relate to that and struggle with that as well. What would be one first step, John, that you would say can take someone today from making those clearer decisions and start living more intentionally?
So I want to bring in a book that I really love by Angela Duckworth. She wrote the great book, Grit. And in Grit, she talks about passion and perseverance, which, if you think about another triangle, those are two legs of the triangle. But I think she's missing an important layer in this. And this is something I talked about in the book. And I use the example of the Naval Academy in this, because my experience from going there is that you can have all the passion and perseverance or grit that you want in life, but if you don't have, in behavioral science, what they call self-control, or I describe as intentionality, then how do you direct that grit so that it's taking you to where you want to go? And this is where self-control or your intentions come into play. So why I say you can either be apathetic, which really means indifferent to your life and what's going on, or you can be intentional about the actions that make up your day, the choices that you make, getting back to that word, choices that you make during the day. So if you're a young professional, this really comes down to how are you showing up every single day? And I'll use a great example of this. I used to work at Lowe's Home Improvement, and one of my favorite leaders was this guy, Steve Szilagyi. And every day when you would ask Steve, Steve, how are you doing today? He would always say, I am outstanding. And how many times do we run into people throughout the day and you ask them that same question and they say, oh man, I'm not having a great day, or this day sucks, or, it could be better, or this. And he told me the story that he was doing the same thing. And what he found is that when he was giving those answers, that's how his days unfolded. But no matter how he was feeling, if he started to tell people, my day is outstanding, or my day is going great, that's a mindset choice. And when you start projecting that and you do it on a routine basis, that's how you start showing up for others. And that's another big thing. As you're going throughout your workday or your weekends, how are you choosing to show up? Are you showing up every day with full energy? Are you going to bed when you should? Are you alert? Are you epitomizing the person that you hope to become? Because if you're not, if you're coming in and you're tired, you're gaming all night, you're doing other things, and you're not giving it your all, how do you think you're going to project yourself? So these are all just choices that we make. You can be indifferent to the life you want to create and do these extracurricular things that keep you up till 2 o'clock in the morning, and you get 4 hours of sleep, and you come in the next day and you feel like you need a nap half the day. Or you can choose to come in to be alert. You can choose to, show up and be indifferent to how you're approaching people, what you're saying to them, or like Steve Szilagyi, you can be intentional about the message that you convey, because not only does it lift you up, but when you say you're outstanding, it makes that other person who you interact with revisit how they're shaping their day as well.
And I think it's so funny because even though it's like subconscious, nobody chooses to wake up and say, I'm going to have a bad day. I'm going to be really sluggish and lazy, and I'm not going to have a smile on today. I think it's just we get into that habit of a switch, and then we actually have the choice. And that's why I love that you bring awareness that you actually can control it and wake up and say, yeah, I'm going to have an outstanding day, and I'm going to have an amazing day. I'm going to lift others up and spread my energy and positivity. And that, I think, is very impactful now onto how we can shift our perspective. A big theme of your book, Passion Struck, which is shifting from that autopilot mode to being purposeful. What is your favorite mindset shift that you think is essential for someone, let's say, that just got out of university? So in their mid-20s, that is trying to figure out what their calling is.
Well, I think everything begins and ends with the action that we take. And typically, no matter where you want to go, you're going to meet friction. So the metaphor I want someone to think about is imagine that you left your smartphone in your house and you went for a drive and you run out of gas. So you have no way to contact anyone. You really have two options. Either you can hitch a ride and be hopeful someone will come by and pick you up, or you can walk, or you're going to have to push the car. So let's just say you take the option that you're going to push the car. At first, it's going to be very difficult to get that car moving, such as the changes we want to make in life. But once you put the effort behind it and you get the critical mass moving, what you see is then you'll take 1 foot, you'll move another foot, you'll start seeing progress. The same thing happens with action in our lives. And so I think the principle that really carries out throughout the whole book is one called the action creator. And I use this example in the book of Captain Wendy Lawrence, who was an astronaut. And Wendy had this dream that she wanted to become an astronaut. And so she put herself on this purposeful path to take all the steps that she could think of that would give her the best chance of getting a shot at it. So she went to the Naval Academy in the second class of females who could go. She got the best grades that she could so she could select becoming a pilot. She became a helicopter pilot because astronauts before her were pilots. She then got accepted into MIT, and this is where things got really difficult for Wendy. She was studying at MIT, and the classes were extremely difficult. And I think this is something we all face. We get into these difficult situations where we don't think we can succeed. And for the first time in her life, she started failing her exams. And so she had the choice that she could have let her dreams slip away right then. But instead, she doubled down, met with her professors, created a schedule with them that she would spend extra time with them because she wasn't grasping the content. And she ended up getting through it, getting that master's degree. And then that led her down the path of becoming an instructor at the Naval Academy. And then she applied to become an astronaut and was selected. But my point is, we face so many hurdles in life. And when you face those hurdles, you don't get out of them by trying to think your way out of them. I mean, you have to think, but we ended up getting ourselves into analysis paralysis instead of thinking of what options we have and start taking action. Because even if you start taking action and it doesn't move the needle, it's going to cause you to pivot and maybe even pivot again, but eventually you're going to figure it out and you're going to move your life forward. So to me, that whole action creator and giving yourself permission to dream your dream are very important messages, especially for the younger generations.
I want to repeat that phrase that you just said, give yourself permission to dream your dream. I think it's super powerful, especially now that a very common dilemma, which you just said, is a lot of people have that boost and surge of motivation, whether it be from educational purposes or an event that they've just attended. But a lot of them struggle with taking the execution. And so I think your message there to just take action and just go ahead and start is really powerful. And I'm starting to see a trend here with how everyone faces these difficulties. And I loved that metaphor, by the way, with a car and how it's physically really demanding and challenging for you to just get it moving. I'm wondering if there is a connection now that you noticed between your military career and what you do now, and what would be the biggest message that you could pick out?
So one of the things I learned at the Naval Academy and when I was an officer was this whole concept of servant leadership. And I have sat through hundreds, if not thousands, of interviews. And when someone asks the question, what's your leadership style? 99% of the time, you hear someone say, I'm a servant leader. I would say about 60 to 70% of the people who I've heard say that, it then turns out that they're also a micromanager. And there's nothing to me that interferes with creativity and getting the best out of your employees than trying to micromanage them. And for whatever reason, I personally feel that servant leadership tends to create more micromanagement than it probably was ever designed to do. So as I've thought about leadership and what I think leaders need to have in the future, it's this whole concept of eyes on but hands off. And the metaphor that I use for it is,
I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor for this episode, Computer Generated Solutions. In today's fast-moving business world, the right partnerships make all the difference. With over 4 decades of expertise, CGS delivers world-class business applications, enterprise learning solutions, and outstanding services across 45 countries. From fashion and healthcare to finance and technology, CGS helps businesses scale efficiently and elevate customer experiences. Find out how CGS can support your company's success today by visiting www.romania.cgsinc.com.
so as I've thought about leadership and what I think leaders need to have in the future, it's this whole concept of eyes on but hands off. And the metaphor that I use for it is gardener leadership. And why I use a gardener is a gardener plants their crops. They have to tend to them, but there's an aspect of letting go because you can't control the weather. You can't control when it's going to rain. You can't control how those plants are going to grow. And I think the same is true today. I mean, think about the distributed environments that people live in. My last jobs in corporate America, I had employees in the Philippines, in Ireland, in France, in India, in China, in Japan, all over the world. It's virtually impossible to think that you're going to be able to be there and to give them hands-on instructions and understand what's in their mind, what's going through them, going on for them. It's similar in the military. Imagine you're a British combat unit, and you're 3,000 miles away from your commander. How is that commander going to know the situation that you're facing to tell you how to react in that situation? Or you're a software developer. I mean, if you start telling that software developer exactly what to build, you're really taking away from them the creativity and their inner genius to approach it in a way that could be 10 times better. So that's why I think being a gardener and being eyes on from the standpoint that you're giving your intent, you're giving a big picture of what you want solved, you're giving direction of this is the outcome that I want, but being hands off and allowing your people to actually use their creativity and their inner talents to approach the job with the best intent and the best mechanisms that they have. Now, this doesn't mean if they have questions that they can't come back to you, they should. And then you should give them more instruction if they ask for it. But it should really be this ecosystem where you are supporting them, you are encouraging them, you're giving them the tools to succeed, but you're not interfering with the way that they're trying to work, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I like that you touched upon how, apart from taking action, you also have to let go. I love the gardener leadership metaphor because I agree. There's some things that are just out of your control. And I think also when we let go of those high expectations, we can also help us shift and lead us to a happier life, a more, let's say, fulfilled and meaningful life. I would like to know what's your personal first step for anyone listening that wants to make that impact but feels small in this big world or insignificant, what you would say to them?
From a work perspective or a personal perspective? Or either?
Either. Let's go for which one you want best.
Let's talk about work, since we were talking about that before. I think people think their way out of so many possibilities that they could achieve because they don't think that they're up to the task. And what I mean by this is I would have never gotten to the point that I did in my career if I hadn't said yes to things I didn't know how to do. I always knew that I was smart enough that I could figure things out. I'll give you a great example. When I was hired at Lowe's, I was hired to do multiple things. One, I was hired to create a Tier 4 data center. I had never built a Tier 4 data center in my life. I had built smaller data centers, but not 150,000 square foot Tier 4 data center. But I knew inherently that if I put the right people around me and I started studying up on it and talked to people, I could figure it out. Well, at the same time I had to do that, Lowe's had, just before I had gotten there, gone through the worst hacking incident in retail history. And that was the primary reason I was being brought in, was to fix this security deficit. Well, no one on earth had ever had to come into that situation before because it never existed. So it's easy to say, I don't have the wherewithal to take that on. But you could also have the mindset that, no one's ever had to deal with this before. So I'm as good as anyone to come at this with alien eyes and to figure it out. So that's kind of how I approached all my career positions. Many of them I had never done the job before, or I'd done aspects of it. And you can sit there and wait until you think you have done all the schooling, all the classes, all the training that you think you need for a job, and I'll tell you, it'll never be enough. There's never going to be that perfect situation you're going to walk into, but I've always taken the opportunities that were thrown at me and said yes to them, gotten into the job, and figured it out, either by adding people to the team who were experts in the area who could complement my weaknesses, or I'm a constant learner, so I know I have neuroplasticity, and I would become like a sponge and try to learn everything that I could. And so if I go to building that data center, it was picking the right construction firm to come in with me. It was picking the right director to lead it who had prior experience building out a data center. It was learning as much as I possibly could about all the different aspects of what we wanted to put into that center so that I could make informed decisions when they were taken up to me to make. So that's one of the biggest suggestions that I would give people is don't be afraid to take a risk. I mean, the worst thing that you're going to do is fail. And we all fail.
And failing is good. I love failing because imagine if you were 30 failures away from finally getting your dream job, or 30 failures away of, finally getting the podcast guest on your show that you've always dreamed of. And I think it's so impactful to just say yes to things and say yes to these opportunities that come your way, because often they put yourself to the test to actually discover how much you are capable of doing. And before I go into the traditions here on the SMARTA Podcast with you, John, I wanted to ask you if you could share with our listener today your exercise from chapter 1, which reveals the power of passion, perseverance, and intentionality. And I think it's super cool as a first chapter. Lead the way.
Well, I'd be happy to do so, Sonia. I kind of got this exercise in some ways from Hilary Swank, the actress. Okay. So I was listening to an interview that Hilary was doing, and she was talking about her life. And if a lot of people don't know who Hilary Swank is, she's won an Oscar 2 times, but there was a period in her life where she was really struggling. She had moved to Los Angeles to be an actress, and she was actually living in a van with her mom and was living there for a long time, doing odd jobs while she was trying to break through. And she had this role that was offered to her. I think the movie's called Boys Don't Cry, where she was paid like a measly amount, $3,500 for the role. It was like something like that, $3,500, $6,000. She took the role and she seized it as an opportunity, not as I have this, this low-paying opportunity. But she chose to make it like the best opportunity that she possibly could every time she got that opportunity. And that movie led her to winning her first Oscar. And she said she did it because she stepped into her sharp edges, the things she feared the most. And that role was one that she really feared before she went into it. So where I go with this exercise is I want the listener to take a moment and I want you to write down your biggest life goals. And I really, really want you to take the seatbelt off for this one. What dream, what desire, what passion has always been sitting passionately in your heart, longing for a chance to break free and to burst into reality? Now I'm going to give you a couple seconds to write it down. Like, what is this huge goal that you've always wanted to achieve? So now that you've got it, I want you to flip it over and I want you to write down the answer to the following question. What is the biggest fear that keeps you from realizing that dream? If you think about me going back to being given the task of, you have to fix this security incident, my fear was I'm an imposter. How am I supposed to do this? No one's ever had to come in and fix something this big. Coming into a new company, where do I even start? And then the second question I want you to think about is, why do we cower from committing to work on something about which we genuinely feel passionate? Why do we settle for less? So in this situation, I had always wanted to be a chief information security officer, and this was my opportunity. But I could have said that this opportunity is too big for me and someone else is better positioned to do it than me. Well, if I would have done that, I probably would have kept that mindset going and going and going, and I never would have achieved that dream, which had I not done it, I wouldn't have had the confidence to take on all application development. I wouldn't have had the confidence to become a chief data officer. I wouldn't have had the confidence to become a CIO. Wouldn't have had the confidence to become a CEO. Wouldn't have had the confidence to write a book, to start a podcast. You see where it goes. We cower to the very things that we want in life. So you have to ask yourself, why, if you're experiencing this, why do you keep doing it? And what do you need to do to shift?
Mm-hmm. And this is, I think, one of the best reflective exercises, because a lot of people need to go a level deeper to getting to know themselves. And it's really interesting to see how many people I know, many friends of mine, have never asked themselves the question of where they see themselves further down in life or where they want to go. And I'm really curious to know, what are the top 2 books that, let's say, completely changed the way you see life, or the perspective or lens through which you view it with.
Well, I mean, there's so many good books out there. This is a book I've recently read. It's called Shoveling Crap, basically. And it's by Cass and Mike Lazaro. And a lot of people might not know Cass and Mike, but they founded this company called Buddy Media and sold it to Salesforce for like 1.2, 1.4 billion. And now they've invested in over 100 different companies. They're serial investors. But what I like about this book is, you know, they're talking about shoveling crap, and we all have crap that we need to move out of our lives. And it's that crap that interferes with us and gets in the way of the dreams that we want to accomplish. So this is a great book about how to deal with that. And I've got another book here that I use all the time. It's called Building a Story Brand. This is Donald Miller's new version of it, 2.0. I think he sold a couple million of copies of this book. But if you have a personal mission, you're an entrepreneur and starting a company, you're a manager and you're trying to motivate a team or supervisor, it all starts and ends by the stories that we curate. And so that's what this book is really all about, is how do you start telling your story, your company's story, your group's story in a way that gets people to lean in on it. So those are two very good ones. And then I would just highlight one more. Right behind you, I see this book as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. And I think it's a little bit interesting that the Let Them Theory was actually discovered by someone else. Let them and let me. But I love how Mel Robbins has amplified this message, and her book does a masterful job of how do you apply this to so many different situations, from your relationships to family interactions to work, all the different areas where we tend to stumble. And it's really about letting go. So that's what I love about that book as well.
And we have this tradition on the SMARTA Podcast where I ask my last guest to leave a question for the next one. So I have this question left over for you, John, if you could answer it. What was the greatest team you've ever been a part of, and what made it such a great one?
I'm going to go back. I mean, there's so many good teams that I've been a part of, but I'm going to go back to, given that we're talking to a younger audience, to when I was in high school. When I was in high school, I ran cross country, and my cross country team won the state national championship. In fact, we were ranked in the top 5 high school running programs in the entire country.
Congratulations.
But when I first got there, we were really horrible. But what made that team so great is when I first started there, I was a freshman, and we had everyone from seniors to my lowly level. But we all collectively committed to the fact that we wanted to be better, and that we were willing to put the work in to be better, and that regardless of how old we were going to let those who had the best talents shine. And the leaders at that time were not necessarily the seniors. It was a couple of the juniors who really became the leaders of the team and who kind of guided us and really took over in many ways from our coach in how we were going about preparing. And one of the biggest hurdles I was trying to overcome is I used to get so much fright at the start of a race. I would work myself up to having all these butterflies to the point that I was throwing up before races and other things. And I remember one of these senior leaders, Brian Strong, taking me to the side and said, "John, you just got to think about it like it's practice and treat the race like it's practice." And so it completely shifted my mindset that every time I started to practice and we hit the track or we were going through our exercises, I started to imagine it as the start of a race. And I started to mentally prepare myself in the same way, that each practice, just treat it like it's the Olympic trials and forget about all the people who are watching. Put yourself in the zone and just do what you were meant to do. And, once that happened, I went from being like 8th or 9th best runner on the team to 2nd or 3rd, because I learned how to channel my energy and how to make it work for me instead of against me. So that was one of the best teams I've ever been a part of.
Wow. Congratulations to you. And I'm also a strong believer, if whenever I can relate to competitions in school, especially about running now that you brought it up. It was always visualizing it before doing it for me, for my case, that really helped me do it better, do it faster, do it quicker. Just before we sign off, because I started the podcast with you directly talking with the person listening, I want to close it in the same way. So if you have any end message that you would like to share with the listener, what would it be?
We have far less control over others than we think or want. And I want you to think about that. We have way less control over others than we think or want. And when you think about that, think about how that could reshape how you approach relationships. How do we start practicing what I call control humility in our partnerships? If you're a parent, your parents, parenting, or even your leadership roles. Now, how do you become more humble in the way that you approach others instead of trying to control the situation so it best fits the outcome that you want? Because, believe it or not, it is so difficult to control situations, so stop trying to do so.
I'll just leave it there at that. John R. Miles, thank you so much for being on the SMARTA Podcast, and best of luck with everything else that you've got going up in the future.
Thank you so much, Sonia, for having me.
Wow. I can tell that John R. Miles' expertise with over 600 episodes in his Passion Struck podcast, 50 million and over downloads, is absolutely amazing. My favorite parts of the episode were by far the gardener's leadership metaphor, and then the car, and how aside from only taking action, you also have to sometimes just learn to let go of things. And now, if nobody tells you this today, I want to be the first to tell you that I truly believe in your ability of creating the life of your dreams, and I can't wait to see you here next week.